Hey everybody, I thought about it and I thought since we're all kind of arriving to the venue at different times tonight perhaps, um, that it'd be best instead of try to get everybody together and talk about the music and have a conversation there, I would just make this video for all of us. So yeah, just a couple minutes on the music tonight and yeah, just maybe give you an introduction on what to expect there at the venue. So, the concert tonight is comprised of two pieces. The first half is a violin concerto by Tchaikovsky, and his only violin concerto. And the second half is the Fourth Symphony of Dmitri Shostakovich. Now, in looking at this program and thinking about maybe planning a night out at the symphony with all of us, I thought that this would be a pretty apt concert to choose because it gives us kind of an idea of this notion of the artist as a troubled figure and creating work in difficult circumstances. But sort of we think of it, but we don't necessarily have the tangible examples of it. I think both of these pieces gives us by far a very clear idea on what that context looks like and how it sounds. And you'd be surprised. Tonight you're not necessarily going to get just angst-ridden music the entire hour and a half or 2 hours that we're there. But you'll certainly, I think, get, with this background, I think you'll get an idea of how subversiveness manifests itself in music. And let's look at the first piece, the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. Now, this piece is phenomenally constructed, but it was very controversial for its time. Today, you'll think of the piece, you'll hear the piece and you'll think, well, I've heard this thing many times before. This sounds like a movie at some point I probably heard. The two lovers, meeting each other and kissing and all this. But in its time, actually, it was somewhat controversial and I think ahead of the game in a sense. Because at that point, Romanticism was being constructed. It was in the midst of it. We didn't have the context now that we have of distilling Romanticism like John Williams, for example, does in his movie scores. It was being constructed at that time. So there were some stops and starts and whatnot. And I think the Violin Concerto Tchaikovsky really sort of pushes the envelope in several important ways. So just very quickly, I don't want to go too long here with all of this. The structure of the piece is three movements. You have a fast movement, a slow movement, central movement, and then a fast final movement. And just maybe a quick little thing about applause. Some people were asking me about that. I'm not a stickler for one of these just evangelical people as far as music and goes and saying, well, you have to do this and conservative and don't applaud. Don't applaud. Back in Mozart's day, people, if they like something in the middle of it, they just start clapping. The reason why perhaps I don't always applaud in the middle of movements is because I think of a lot of these pieces as a story. So after a chapter, sometimes you put it down and you go and you have a drink or something, or you go take a nap, or you just put the book down. Speaking of which, you can see behind me I have all these books for globalization class I have to read. So maybe that's another reason why I didn't do I'm just kidding, the talk today. But I think of it as a story, and I think of it as a narrative arc. And both of these pieces, I think, have that. So waiting to the end to applaud kind of maintains the tension between all of that. So that's probably why I don't necessarily always clap for symphony concerts. For opera, sometimes they're numbers operas. So you have an aria, someone shows off and hits these high notes, and then you have maybe a recitative, and then you have another aria where another character just goes crazy. So maybe at that point it's good to applaud, and kind of people are moving around on stage and it's fine. With symphony, sometimes you want to get that tension, and then you want to, finally at the end, you want to say, yes, exhale, So that just to answer that question, a couple of people have actually asked me that. Okay, the Tchaikovsky. So three movements, fast, slow, fast. Tchaikovsky's life was fascinating in that he was sort of this brilliant musician that jumped into academia and taught at the Moscow Conservatory because of necessity. He was able to find, this is really a cool story, he was able to find this this benefactor, this woman who wrote him a note, I think heard some of his music, wrote him a letter and said, Tchaikovsky, I will fund you until the rest of your life. I will pay you just to write your music. There's one condition. We never meet. So Nadia von Meck is the woman. And they actually, at one point, almost met at a concert, but mutual friends of theirs kind of kept them apart, made sure they didn't cross paths. But this woman was a fundamental part in enabling Tchaikovsky to have the freedom to be able to create these pieces of music. Another fascinating thing about his life is his personal life. He was teaching at the conservatory, and this really very attractive by what everybody says. What I've read, a music student, I think composition student, maybe a theory student. She fell in love with her professor, Tchaikovsky, the young professor, and she was very young, probably early 20s, perhaps, and fell in love with him. And they married, and you think, wow, this is a story made in heaven. This professor and this young student, and well, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but the reality was Tchaikovsky was gay. So, the marriage lasted 6 weeks, and it tortured him. And this type of torture, and these torturous sort of situations, I think, kind of haunt Tchaikovsky. And you ask yourself, well, is chicken or the egg? I mean, did the artistic output benefit from this angst, or the opposite? Was the angst the opposite of what I just said? All right, so interesting story. So the violin concerto, you don't necessarily get all of that. In the central movement, you get some interplay. You get a Russian folk theme that he just plays around and meshes around with, and creates all these different colors and overlapping structures. Very interesting. Another thing to keep note in the Tchaikovsky all throughout is that Tchaikovsky, unlike Shostakovich, utilizes a theme. So he gives you the theme in the beginning, and he finds a way to repeat the theme. So some composers create contrasting themes. So they create A, then they give you B, then they maybe play around with A, so A prime, maybe B prime, and then they bring... Tchaikovsky's all about A, etc. He changes the colors, he changes the orchestration, but you're going to get a lot of the same theme repeated over again. The genius of it is the construction of the theme, so you'll hear the materials being just brilliant, and then how he sort of just changes it little by little, so you'll see that transformation happen. Okay, so that's Tchaikovsky. What else about Tchaikovsky? Oh, the concerto, just the notion of the concerto. You're going to see a solo violinist just shredding on the violin, just going crazy, and that's kind of a singer with a backup band, if you think of it that way. But the orchestra isn't just a backup band. You'll hear them having a dialogue sometimes. You'll hear the orchestra maybe taking the lead in something or presenting some information, a theme, and then the violin taking it over and saying, all right, I can do better than that. You'll hear sometimes the violin on its own in a cadenza just going crazy, and that's meant for the soloist to just show off. And then the orchestra will come back in. And in fact, at the end of the first movement, you have this brilliant cadenza that Tchaikovsky wrote. And I'm sorry, that I think one of the violinists that originally played it wrote. And then the orchestra comes back in. It's a brilliant moment. These moments where you hear the violin playing three notes, three different strings at the same time, and all these, they're called double and triple stops. So when you're playing several notes at once, that's what's going on there. Last thing about this piece. As I said, it was controversial at its time. The person that originally was supposed to play it, the premier, actually pulled out and said, sorry, but this is music that, quote, stinks in the ear. Well, now it's one of the top 40 pieces, I would say, in classical music, maybe top 20. So you're going to hear Warhorse tonight. You're going to hear a piece that is established in the repertoire, and a piece that will show off the violin, as well the soloist, as well as the orchestra behind. Okay, so that's Tchaikovsky. Then we'll have an intermission, and then, oh, by the way, don't be late because you might miss the whole first half, and then you'll miss the actual nice, pleasant music, because the second half, okay, that's a little more angst at your sleeve, or whatever, tip of the mixing metaphors. But you know what I mean. That's the one where you really hear the angst constantly in the music.